Marcus Chun adjusted his Italian silk tie as the elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor of the Chun Industries building. The morning light filtered through the glass walls, casting long shadows across the marble lobby below. At 38, he had built an empire that spanned 3 continents, turning a small tech startup into a billion-dollar corporation that employed over 50,000 people worldwide. His reflection in the polished elevator doors showed a man who had everything money could buy. The custom-tailored suit cost more than most people earned in a month. The watch on his wrist was a limited-edition Patek Philippe worth enough to buy a house. His penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, and his garage held a collection of supercars that automotive magazines featured on their covers. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the executive floor where his assistant Sarah was already waiting with his morning schedule. She had been with the company for 8 years, one of the few employees who had survived his demanding standards and perfectionist nature. "Good morning, Mr. Chun," Sarah said, falling into step beside him as he walked toward his corner office. "The board meeting is at 9, followed by the merger discussions with the European partners at 11. The charity gala planning committee wants 15 minutes at 2, and your interview with Forbes is scheduled for 4. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into the high-speed mode that had made him successful. Every minute was accounted for, every decision calculated for maximum profit and efficiency. He had learned early in his career that sentiment and emotion were luxuries he could not afford if he wanted to stay ahead of the competition. His office was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline. Awards and photographs lined the walls, documenting his rise from a college dropout to one of the youngest billionaires in America. The desk was made from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood, and the chairs were crafted by the same Italian artisans who furnished luxury yachts. Marcus settled into his chair and opened his laptop, immediately immersing himself in the quarterly reports that would determine the company's next strategic moves. The numbers were good, better than good actually. Revenue was up 18%, and the new artificial intelligence division was exceeding all projections. The merger with the German technology firm would give them access to European markets and add another $2 billion to their valuation. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Marcus moved through each appointment with the precision of a well-oiled machine, making decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. His reputation for being tough but fair had earned him respect in the business world, though some whispered that he had become too focused on profits and lost touch with the human side of leadership. During the charity gala planning meeting, Marcus half listened as the committee discussed the annual fundraising event. Chun Industries was expected to make a substantial donation, as they did every year. It was good for the company image and provided valuable networking opportunities with other wealthy donors and influential politicians. "We're expecting to raise over $5 million this year," said Mrs. Patterson, the committee chairwoman. "The Children's Hospital wing will be a wonderful addition to the city." Marcus signed the authorization for the company's $200,000 contribution without looking up from his phone, where he was monitoring the Asian markets. Charity was a necessary business expense, a way to maintain the company's public image and satisfy the board's social responsibility requirements. The afternoon interview with Forbes went smoothly. The reporter asked the usual questions about his success story, his business philosophy, and his plans for expansion. Marcus gave the practiced answers he had refined over hundreds of similar interviews, emphasizing innovation, hard work, and strategic vision while carefully avoiding any personal details about his private life. "What drives you to keep pushing when you already have more money than you could spend in several lifetimes?" the reporter asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Marcus paused for a moment, considering the question. "Success isn't about the money," he said finally. "It's about building something that lasts, creating value, and staying ahead of the competition. The moment you stop pushing forward is the moment you start falling behind." It was a good answer, the kind that would look impressive in print. But as the reporter packed up his equipment and left, Marcus found himself staring out the window at the city below, wondering if he really believed what he had just said. The rest of the day continued at its usual breakneck pace. More meetings, more decisions, more opportunities to expand the empire he had built. By 7 in the evening, the office had emptied except for the cleaning crew and a few dedicated employees working late to meet deadlines. Marcus was reviewing contracts for a new manufacturing facility in Southeast Asia when Sarah knocked on his door. "Mr. Chun, I'm heading home now. Is there anything else you need?" He looked up from his documents, realizing that the sun had set while he was working. The city lights twinkled like stars beyond his windows, and he could see the streams of traffic as people made their way home to their families. "No, that's fine. See you tomorrow," he said, already turning back to his work. Sarah hesitated at the door. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, when was the last time you took a real break? I mean, a vacation where you actually disconnected from work?" Marcus frowned, trying to remember. There had been business trips to exotic locations, conferences at luxury resorts, and networking events at exclusive clubs. But an actual vacation where he did nothing but relax? He couldn't recall the last time. "I'll think about it," he said dismissively, hoping she would take the hint and leave him to his work. After Sarah left, Marcus continued working until nearly midnight, finally deciding to head home when his eyes began to strain from staring at the computer screen. The drive to his penthouse was quick at that hour, with minimal traffic on the usually congested streets. His apartment was exactly as he had left it that morning. The housekeeper had been by to clean and organize, leaving everything in perfect order. The space was beautiful, but somehow felt empty, like a museum display rather than a home where someone actually lived. Marcus poured himself a glass of 25-year-old scotch and stood on his balcony, looking out over the city that never slept. Somewhere below, millions of people were living their lives, spending time with their families, sharing meals, and making memories together. He tried to remember the last time he had shared a meal with someone who wasn't discussing business. His parents lived across the country and rarely spoke to him except during holidays, and even those conversations were strained and formal. His college friends had gradually drifted away as his career consumed more and more of his time and attention. There had been relationships over the years, but they never lasted long. Women were initially attracted to his success and wealth, but few could tolerate his obsession with work and his inability to prioritize anything above his business empire. His last serious relationship had ended 2 years ago when his girlfriend left him for a teacher who made a fraction of his salary, but was actually present and emotionally available. Marcus finished his drink and went to bed, setting his alarm for 5:30 so he could get an early start on the next day's challenges. Sleep came quickly, as it always did when he was exhausted from a long day of work. The next morning followed the same pattern as every other morning. Workout in his private gym, shower, breakfast while reading the financial news, and then the drive to the office. The routine was comforting in its predictability, providing structure and purpose to his days. But as Marcus walked through the lobby of his building, he noticed something different. Near the main entrance, a small crowd had gathered around what appeared to be a young girl sitting on the marble floor. She looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that had seen better days. The security guards were trying to convince her to leave, explaining that the building was for business only and not a place for children to play. The girl seemed calm despite the attention, sitting cross-legged with a small backpack beside her and what looked like a homework assignment spread out on the floor. "What's the situation here?" Marcus asked the head of security, a retired police officer named Rodriguez who had been with the company for 5 years. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Chun," Rodriguez said, looking embarrassed. "This kid showed up about an hour ago and won't leave. Says she's waiting for her mom to get off work. But we've checked with all the cleaning companies, and none of them have anyone matching her description." Marcus looked down at the girl, who was now watching their conversation with intelligent dark eyes. She didn't seem frightened or upset, just patient and determined. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, crouching down to her level. "Isabella," she said simply. "My mom works here at night. She cleans the offices upstairs." "Which cleaning company does she work for?" Marcus asked gently. Isabella shrugged. "I don't know the name. She just says she cleans the big building with the important man who's always working." Rodriguez shook his head. "We've called all the contracted cleaning services. None of them have an Isabella or anyone matching the mother's description on their payroll." Marcus studied the girl more carefully. Her clothes were clean but clearly secondhand, and her sneakers had holes near the toes. Despite her circumstances, she carried herself with a dignity that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. "Isabella, where do you go to school?" he asked. "Jefferson Elementary," she said, pointing in the direction of the public school about 6 blocks away. "But we had a half-day today for teacher meetings." "And where's your mom supposed to pick you up?" "She's not," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "I'm supposed to wait here until she's done working. She said to sit in the lobby and be quiet and not bother anyone." Marcus felt a strange tightness in his chest. The idea of a child that young being left alone in a business district for hours seemed wrong, even if her mother was supposedly working in the building. "Mr. Chun," Rodriguez said quietly, "I think we need to call child services. This doesn't seem right." Before Marcus could respond, Isabella stood up and began gathering her homework materials. "I can go wait outside if I'm causing trouble," she said with the same calm dignity. "My mom said important people work here, and I shouldn't bother them." Something in her voice stopped Marcus from agreeing with Rodriguez's suggestion. Instead, he found himself saying, "Why don't you come up to my office for a few minutes? We can try to figure out where your mom is working." Rodriguez looked surprised, and Marcus had to admit he was surprised himself. He had never brought a child into his office, and he certainly had never interrupted his schedule for someone else's family problems. But, as Isabella carefully put her homework back into her backpack and stood up with quiet grace, Marcus felt compelled to help her in a way he couldn't quite explain. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent except for the soft music playing overhead. Isabella stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, watching the numbers climb with patient attention. "Have you ever been this high up in a building before?" Marcus asked, trying to make conversation. "No, sir," Isabella said politely. "My mom says rich people live and work up high so they can look down and see everything." The comment struck Marcus as oddly perceptive for such a young child. When the elevator doors opened, Isabella followed him quietly down the hallway, her eyes taking in the expensive artwork and elegant furnishings without comment. Sarah was already at her desk, preparing for the day's schedule. She looked up in surprise when she saw Marcus approaching with a young girl in tow. "Sarah, this is Isabella," Marcus said, still not entirely sure why he was involving himself in this situation. "Her mother apparently works in the building, and we're trying to locate her." Sarah's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She smiled warmly at Isabella and offered her a chair beside her desk. "Would you like some juice or a snack while we figure this out, sweetie?" Isabella shook her head politely. "No thank you, ma'am. I'm not supposed to take food from strangers." The response showed both good parenting and heartbreaking caution. Marcus wondered what experiences had taught such a young child to be so careful about accepting help from adults. "Isabella, can you tell us more about your mom's job?" Marcus asked. "What time does she usually start work?" "She leaves our apartment when it gets dark," Isabella said. "She brings her own cleaning supplies in a big cart and comes back when the sun comes up. She says she has to clean all the offices for the important people who make lots of money." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. The timeline matched the night cleaning shift, but none of the contracted companies had any record of Isabella's mother. "What's your mom's name?" Sarah asked gently. "Maria Santos," Isabella said. "But sometimes she uses different names for different jobs." The admission hung in the air with obvious implications. Marcus began to understand that they were dealing with a situation more complex than a simple scheduling mix-up. "Isabella," he said carefully, "is your mom here in this country legally?" The young girl's eyes became guarded, and she looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "She says I shouldn't talk about that with strangers." Marcus felt a wave of sympathy for both Isabella and her mother. He was beginning to piece together a picture of a woman doing whatever was necessary to provide for her daughter, even if it meant taking cleaning jobs that didn't exist on any official payroll. "You're not in any trouble," Marcus assured her. "I just want to help you find your mom." Isabella looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "Are you the important man she talks about? The one who's always working and doesn't have time for anything else?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I don't know. What else does she say about him?" "She says he must be very lonely, working all the time in his big office. She feels sorry for him because he probably doesn't have anyone to cook him dinner or ask him about his day. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. Here was a child whose mother was struggling to make ends meet, yet she was expressing sympathy for someone she assumed was wealthy and successful. "Does your mom ever talk about her work?" Sarah asked. "About which offices she cleans or what time she finishes?" Isabella nodded. "She says the top floors are the prettiest, with big windows that show the whole city. But they're also the saddest because they're always empty except for one man who stays very late." Marcus realized with a start that Isabella's mother had probably seen him working alone in his office during her cleaning rounds. The idea that someone had been observing his solitary late-night routine made him feel unexpectedly vulnerable. "Isabella," he said slowly, "what would you say to that man if you met him?" The young girl considered the question seriously, tilting her head to one side as she thought. "I would ask him why he doesn't go home to his family," she said finally. "Everyone should have someone waiting for them at home." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent years building his empire, accumulating wealth and power, but he had never stopped to consider what he might be missing in the process. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from the legal department. The European merger required his immediate attention, and the German executives were waiting for his call. Marcus looked at Isabella, then at Sarah, torn between his professional obligations and this unexpected personal moment that seemed to be changing something fundamental inside him. "Mr. Chun," Sarah said quietly, "the merger call can wait 15 minutes. This is important too." Isabella walked into Marcus's office with the same quiet grace she had shown throughout the morning. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in the panoramic view of the city, but she didn't rush to the windows like most children would. Instead, she stood politely near the door, waiting for permission to explore. "You can look around," Marcus said, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The view is pretty spectacular from up here." Isabella approached the windows slowly, pressing her small hands against the glass as she gazed out at the sprawling cityscape below. "My mom was right," she said softly. "You can see everything from up here. All the people look so small, like ants." Marcus joined her at the window, seeing his city from a different perspective for the first time in years. From this height, the traffic and crowds below seemed insignificant, reduced to patterns and movements without individual meaning. "What do you see when you look down there?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Isabella pointed to a small park several blocks away where tiny figures moved among the trees. "I see families having picnics and kids playing on swings. There's a man pushing a stroller and a lady throwing a ball for her dog." She turned to look at Marcus. "Don't you ever want to go down there and be with them?" The question was so innocent, yet it cut straight to the heart of something Marcus had been avoiding for years. He had convinced himself that he was above such simple pleasures, that his time was too valuable to waste on mundane activities. "I'm usually too busy with work," he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. "But work ends sometime, doesn't it?" Isabella asked. "My mom works really hard, but she always comes home to make me dinner and help with my homework. She says family time is the most important time." Marcus felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Envy? Regret? He had structured his entire life around the belief that success required sacrifice, that personal relationships were distractions from his goals. "Isabella, what's your favorite thing to do with your mom?" he asked. Her face lit up with the first truly childlike expression he had seen from her. "We play board games on Sunday mornings when she doesn't have to work. She makes pancakes shaped like animals, and we pretend we're having breakfast in a fancy restaurant. She uses a funny voice and calls me madam and asks what I would like to order today." The image of a tired cleaning woman taking time to create magical moments for her daughter made Marcus feel small in a way that had nothing to do with the view from his office window. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah entered with a cup of hot chocolate and a plate of cookies from the executive kitchen. "I thought Isabella might be getting hungry," Sarah said, setting the refreshments on the small table near Marcus's sitting area. "Thank you," Isabella said politely, but she didn't move toward the food. "Should I wait for permission?" "Of course not, sweetheart," Sarah said gently. "This is for you." As Isabella carefully sat down and took small, polite sips of the hot chocolate, Marcus found himself studying her mannerisms. Despite her young age and obviously limited circumstances, she carried herself with a dignity and grace that many adults never achieved. "Isabella," Marcus said, taking a seat across from her. "Tell me about school. What's your favorite subject?" "Math," she said without hesitation. "Numbers always make sense. They don't change based on how you're feeling or what kind of day you're having. 2 plus 2 is always 4, whether you're happy or sad or worried about paying the rent." The mature observation surprised Marcus. "Are you worried about paying the rent?" Isabella looked down at her cup. "Sometimes I hear my mom on the phone with the landlord. She promises to have the money soon, and she works extra jobs to make sure we don't have to move again." "Have you moved a lot?" Marcus asked gently. "5 times since I started school," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "Mom says we're just looking for the perfect place, but I think perfect places cost too much money." Marcus felt a tightness in his throat. This child was dealing with housing instability and financial stress while still maintaining her dignity and optimistic outlook. Meanwhile, he owned properties he rarely visited and spent more on a single dinner than many families had for groceries in a month. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation towards something more hopeful. Isabella's eyes brightened again. "A teacher. I want to help kids learn math so they can understand how numbers work. And I want to make sure no kid ever feels stupid for not knowing something." "That's a wonderful goal," Marcus said, and he meant it. "What made you decide on teaching?" "My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, is really nice. When I started at Jefferson Elementary in the middle of the year because we moved, she helped me catch up with the other kids. She stayed after school to work with me and never made me feel bad for being behind." Isabella paused to take another sip of hot chocolate. "She said I have a gift for math, and that gifts are meant to be shared with other people." Marcus was struck by the wisdom of both the teacher and the student. Here was a child who had every reason to become bitter or give up, yet she was already planning how to help others. "Isabella, can I ask you something?" Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. "What do you think makes someone successful?" Isabella considered the question seriously, the same way she had approached everything else that morning. "I think successful people are the ones who make other people feel better about themselves. Like Mrs. Rodriguez, or the man at the corner store who always asks how my mom is doing, or the lady at the library who helps me find books." "What about money?" Marcus asked. "Don't you think having a lot of money makes someone successful?" Isabella shook her head. "Money is nice, and it helps with rent and food and stuff. But I know some kids at school whose parents have big cars and fancy clothes, and they're mean to other kids. My mom says that's not success, that's just being rich." She paused thoughtfully. "She says the two things aren't the same." Marcus felt as if he were seeing himself clearly for the first time in years. He had spent so long equating wealth with worth, success with net income, that he had lost sight of any other measure of value. "Your mom sounds like a very wise woman," he said softly. "She is," Isabella agreed. "She always knows the right thing to say when I'm sad or scared. And she gives the best hugs in the world." "When was the last time you had a really good hug?" Marcus asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. But Isabella didn't seem to mind. "This morning, before Mom left for her day job. She works at the hotel downtown during the day and cleans offices at night. She was tired, but she still made me breakfast and helped me practice my spelling words." The reality of Isabella's mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he had been accumulating more wealth than he could spend in several lifetimes, hardworking people like Maria Santos were struggling to provide basic necessities for their children. A soft chime from Marcus's computer indicated that his morning conference call with the European partners was about to begin. The merger discussions that had seemed so important an hour ago now felt trivial compared to the conversation he was having with Isabella. "I have to take a business call," Marcus said reluctantly. "But I want to continue our conversation afterward, okay?" Isabella nodded and returned to her hot chocolate, pulling a worn book from her backpack to read while she waited. Marcus put on his headset and connected to the video conference, where 6 executives from the German technology firm were waiting to discuss the final details of their partnership. The negotiations had been ongoing for months, and Today's meeting was supposed to finalize the deal that would add $2 billion to Chin Industries' valuation. Gentlemen, Marcus began, falling automatically into his business persona. I trust everyone has reviewed the revised contract terms. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus discussed market projections, intellectual property rights, and profit-sharing agreements. But throughout the conversation, he found himself glancing at Isabella, who was quietly reading her book and occasionally looking out the window at the city below. The German executives were eager to close the deal, and the terms were favorable to both companies. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have been focused entirely on maximizing every aspect of the agreement. But today, something was different. Mr. Chun, said Klaus Weber, the lead negotiator from the German firm, we're prepared to sign the preliminary agreement today if you can confirm the employment terms for the transition period. Marcus looked at the contract details on his screen, which called for streamlining operations in both companies. In corporate speak, that meant laying off redundant employees to maximize efficiency and profits. How many people are we talking about? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from previous discussions. Approximately 3,000 positions across both companies, Weber replied matter-of-factly. Mostly in administrative and support roles that can be automated or consolidated. 3,000 people. 3,000 families who would lose their primary source of income. 3,000 stories like Maria Santos, trying to provide for their children while facing an uncertain future. And what's the timeline for these reductions? Marcus asked, stalling for time as unfamiliar thoughts raced through his mind. We'd like to complete the transition within 6 months of signing, Weber said. The sooner we can eliminate redundancies, the faster we'll see improved profit margins. Marcus stared at the numbers on his screen. The merger would make both companies more profitable, and his personal net worth would increase by several $100 million. From a purely business perspective, it was an excellent deal. But, as he glanced at Isabella again, still reading peacefully in his office chair, he found himself wondering about the 3,000 people whose lives would be disrupted by his signature on a contract. Gentlemen, Marcus said slowly, I need to review a few additional details before we proceed. Can we schedule a follow-up call for later this week? There was silence on the conference line. Marcus Chin was known for making quick decisions, and delays were unusual for him. Is there a specific concern? Weber asked carefully. We've been negotiating these terms for months. I want to explore alternative approaches to the staffing transitions, Marcus said, surprised by his own words. Perhaps we can find ways to retrain employees rather than simply eliminating positions. Klaus Weber's expression on the video screen showed confusion. Mr. Chun, that would significantly impact our cost projections and reduce the efficiency gains we discussed. I understand that, Marcus replied. But I think we should consider the long-term benefits of maintaining institutional knowledge and employee loyalty. It was corporate speak for something Marcus was only beginning to understand himself. He was starting to see his employees as more than just numbers on a spreadsheet, more than resources to be optimized for maximum efficiency. After ending the conference call with promises to reconvene later in the week, Marcus removed his headset and looked at Isabella, who had been listening quietly to his side of the conversation. That sounded like an important meeting, she said simply. It was, Marcus admitted. We were talking about joining our company with another company to make more money. Will that help people? Isabella asked. The question was so direct, so innocent, that Marcus found himself struggling to answer. It will help the companies make more profit, he said finally. But will it help people? Isabella repeated. Marcus sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the 3,000 employees who would lose their jobs, the families who would face financial uncertainty, the children who might have to move schools like Isabella had. I'm not sure, he admitted, and the honesty felt both liberating and terrifying. Isabella nodded as if his answer made perfect sense. My mom always says that if you're not sure something is right, you should wait until you are sure before you do it. The simple wisdom hit Marcus harder than any business school lecture or boardroom presentation ever had. He had built his career on quick decisions and calculated risks, but he had rarely stopped to consider whether his choices were truly right in any meaningful sense beyond their impact on profits. Isabella, he said suddenly, would you like to help me with something? She looked up from her book with interest. What kind of help? I need to make some important decisions about my company, and I think you might see things more clearly than I do. Isabella closed her book and gave him her full attention. Marcus spent the next hour explaining his business dilemma to Isabella in simple terms, describing how companies sometimes join together to become stronger and more profitable, but how that process often meant some people lost their jobs. Isabella listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an intuitive understanding of fairness and consequences that many of his highly paid consultants lacked. So you would get more money, but 3,000 people would lose their jobs, she summarized. That's right, Marcus confirmed. The companies would save money by not having to pay as many salaries. Isabella frowned, processing this information. But if those people don't have jobs, how will they buy food and pay rent? And if they can't buy things, won't that hurt other businesses too? Marcus paused, struck by the simplicity of her economic reasoning. Isabella was describing a concept that economists called the multiplier effect, but she had arrived at it through basic human empathy rather than academic theory. You're absolutely right, he said slowly. I hadn't thought about it that way. Could you use some of your money to help those people find new jobs instead of just firing them? Isabella asked. That would cost more money and reduce profits, Marcus explained, then felt foolish for defending a position he was no longer sure he believed in. But you already have lots of money, right? Isabella said. Would having a little less money but helping people be worth it? Before Marcus could answer, Sarah knocked on the door and entered with a concerned expression. Mr. Chun, I've been making some calls about Isabella's mother, she said carefully. I think I may have found something. Marcus felt his stomach tighten with worry. What did you find? There's a Maria Santos who was taken to City General Hospital early this morning, Sarah said gently. She was brought in after collapsing at a hotel where she apparently works housekeeping during the day. Isabella stood up quickly, her book falling to the floor. Is my mom okay? Sarah knelt down to Isabella's level. The hospital says she's stable, but she's very tired and needs rest. Apparently, she's been working too many hours and not eating enough. Marcus felt a wave of guilt wash over him. While he had been living in luxury and worrying about profit margins, a hard-working mother had been pushing herself to exhaustion just to provide for her daughter. We need to go to the hospital right now, he said, standing up and reaching for his jacket. Mr. Chun, Sarah said carefully. The hospital is asking about Isabella's emergency contacts and family situation. There may be some complications with what? Marcus asked. Sarah glanced meaningfully at Isabella, then back at Marcus. Legal status. The hospital is required to contact child services when a minor's guardian is hospitalized, and there are no documented relatives. Marcus understood the implication immediately. If Maria Santos was in the country without proper documentation, Isabella could be placed in foster care while her mother recovered. How long before they contact child services? He asked. The hospital said they would make the call this afternoon if no family members come forward, Sarah replied. Marcus looked at Isabella, who had gone very quiet and pale. Despite her mature demeanor, she was still a 9-year-old girl who needed her mother. Sarah, call the hospital and tell them that Isabella's family is on the way, Marcus said firmly. And contact our legal department. I want to know what options we have. As Sarah left to make the calls, Marcus turned to Isabella, who was trying very hard not to cry. Hey, he said softly, kneeling down beside her chair. We're going to figure this out, okay? Your mom is going to be fine. What if they take me away from her? Isabella whispered, the first sign of true fear she had shown all day. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. This brave, intelligent child who had faced housing instability and financial stress with remarkable grace was finally showing the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath her composure. That's not going to happen, Marcus said with more conviction than he felt. I promise you. Isabella looked up at him with eyes that were too old and too worried for her age. You can't promise that. You don't have control over everything, even if you are important. Her words stung because they were true. For all his wealth and influence, Marcus couldn't simply wave a hand and fix the complex legal and social issues surrounding Isabella and her mother. But he could try. You're right, he admitted. I can't control everything. But I can do everything in my power to help. And I promise you that I will. Isabella studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. But can I ask you something first? Of course. Isabella took a deep breath, gathering courage for whatever she wanted to say. If you help us, you won't make money from it. You might even lose money. So why would you do it? Marcus sat back on his heels, struck by the directness of her question. It was the same issue he had been grappling with regarding the merger, but applied to a much more personal situation. Because it's the right thing to do, he said, surprised by how easily the answer came. But you said business is about making money and being successful, Isabella pointed out. I did say that, Marcus admitted. But I think I was wrong about what success really means. Isabella tilted her head to one side. What do you think it means now? Marcus looked out the window at the city below, where millions of people were living their lives, working hard, taking care of their families, and finding meaning in ways that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. I think success means using whatever power you have to make other people's lives better, he said slowly. And I think it means having people who care about you and who you care about in return. Isabella nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Like having a family. Yes, Marcus said, feeling something click into place in his mind. Like having a family. Sarah returned with updates from the hospital and the legal department. Maria Santos was indeed stable, but suffering from exhaustion and dehydration. She had been working 16-hour days between her hotel job and various cleaning contracts, including some unofficial work in office buildings. The legal situation was complex. Maria's tourist visa had expired 2 years ago, making her undocumented. If child services became involved, there was a real possibility that Isabella could be placed in foster care while her mother faced deportation proceedings. However, Sarah continued, our legal team says there may be some options if we can demonstrate that Maria has stable employment and community ties. Marcus was already formulating a plan. What would we need to do? She would need a legitimate job with proper documentation, health insurance, and a stable living situation, Sarah explained. And she would need a sponsor who could vouch for her character and reliability. Done, Marcus said without hesitation. Sarah looked surprised. Mr. Chun, you're talking about a significant legal and financial commitment. Our lawyers would need to review, then have them review it, Marcus interrupted. But get the paperwork started now. Isabella had been listening to the adult conversation with growing confusion. What does all this mean, she asked. Marcus knelt down beside her again. It means your mom is going to have a good job with health insurance, and you're going to have a stable place to live. And, most importantly, no one is going to separate you from your mother. But why would you do all that for us? Isabella asked. You don't even know us. Marcus thought about all the hours he had spent alone in his office, all the relationships he had sacrificed for his career, all the simple human connections he had dismissed as distractions from his goals. Because you asked me a question that changed how I think about everything, he said honestly. What question? Marcus smiled, remembering the moment in his office when Isabella had asked about the lonely man who worked late every night. You asked if I had a family too, and you made me realize that having all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you don't have people to share it with. Isabella considered this seriously. So we would be like your family? The question caught Marcus off guard. He had been thinking in terms of helping Isabella and her mother, but the idea of them becoming part of his life in a meaningful way was something he hadn't fully considered. Would you like that? He asked carefully. Isabella nodded. I think you need a family more than you need more money. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. This wise little girl had seen through all his defenses and identified exactly what had been missing from his life. I think you're absolutely right, he said. Over the next several hours, Marcus threw himself into solving Isabella's family crisis with the same intensity he usually reserved for business deals. But this time, the goal wasn't profit or market domination. It was simply making sure a mother and daughter could stay together. He contacted the best immigration lawyers in the city, arranging for them to meet with Maria at the hospital. He had his human resources department create a position for Maria in the building's facilities management team, complete with full benefits and a salary that would allow her to support her daughter with dignity. Most importantly, He personally went to the hospital to speak with Maria Santos, explaining the situation and assuring her that there were no strings attached to his help. Maria was a slight woman in her early 30s, with the same intelligent dark eyes as her daughter and hands that showed the wear of hard physical labor. Despite her exhaustion and worry, she maintained the same quiet dignity that Isabella had inherited. "Why would you do this for strangers?" she asked in accented but clear English. Marcus looked at Isabella, who was holding her mother's hand and had finally relaxed for the first time all day. "Your daughter taught me something important today," he said. "She taught me that success isn't about how much money you have. It's about how you treat other people and whether you have people in your life who matter to you." Maria squeezed Isabella's hand. "She is very wise for her age. Sometimes I think she understands the world better than I do." "I think she does," Marcus agreed. "And I think she could teach all of us a few things about what really matters." As the legal paperwork was processed and arrangements were made for Maria's new job, Marcus found himself thinking about the merger deal he had postponed. The German executives were expecting an answer by the end of the week, and he still needed to make a decision. But now he had a different framework for making that decision. Instead of asking what would maximize profits, he found himself asking what would be best for the people affected by his choices. The next morning, Marcus called Klaus Weber to discuss alternative approaches to the merger. "What if we focused on retraining programs instead of layoffs?" Marcus suggested. "We could invest in helping employees develop new skills that would be valuable in the merged company." Weber was skeptical. That would significantly increase costs and reduce the efficiency gains. In the short term, yes, Marcus agreed. But think about the long-term benefits. We'd have a more skilled workforce, better employee loyalty, and a stronger reputation in the community. That has to be worth something. "Mr. Chun," Weber said carefully, "this is a significant departure from our previous discussions. May I ask what changed?" Marcus looked out his office window, where he could see the small park where families gathered for picnics and children played on swings. Somewhere down there, real people were living real lives that were affected by the decisions made in boardrooms like his. "I learned something about success," Marcus said. "I learned that the best deals are the ones where everyone wins." After several more hours of negotiation, they reached a compromise. The merger would proceed, but with substantial investments in employee retraining and job placement assistance. The profit margins would be lower, but both companies would emerge stronger and more sustainable. When Marcus shared the news with Isabella later that day, she listened carefully to his explanation of the revised deal. "So instead of firing people, you're going to help them learn new jobs?" she asked. "That's right." Isabella nodded approvingly. "That sounds much better. Now those 3,000 people won't have to worry about paying rent or buying food for their families. And the companies will still be successful," Marcus added. "Just not quite as profitable. But you'll sleep better at night," Isabella said with the confidence of someone who understood the connection between conscience and peace of mind. Marcus realized she was absolutely right. For the first time in years, he was making business decisions based on more than just financial calculations. He was considering the human impact of his choices, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his office looking out at the same city view that had once made him feel powerful and isolated. But now he saw it differently. Instead of feeling above the crowds below, he felt connected to them. Isabella visited his office every week after school, doing her homework at the small table while Marcus worked. Their conversations had become the highlight of his week, providing perspective and wisdom that no business consultant could offer. Maria had thrived in her new position, managing the building's facilities with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. She had also enrolled in evening English classes, working toward her goal of eventually starting her own cleaning business. The merger had been completed successfully, and despite the additional costs of the retraining programs, both companies were performing well. More importantly, Marcus felt proud of the process they had used to achieve their goals. On this particular afternoon, Isabella was working on a school project about heroes in the community. She was supposed to interview someone she considered heroic and write a report about what made them special. "Mr. Chun," she said, looking up from her notebook, "can I interview you for my project?" Marcus was surprised. I'm not really a hero, Isabella. I'm just a businessman. Isabella shook her head firmly. You saved my family. You helped 3,000 people keep their jobs. You changed your whole life because you learned something was more important than money. That sounds like a hero to me. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Over the past 3 months, Isabella and Maria had given him something he hadn't even realized he was missing, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement. Okay, he said, settling into the chair across from her. What do you want to know? Isabella picked up her pencil and prepared to write. First question, what's the most important thing you've learned this year? Marcus thought about all the changes in his life, all the shifts in his priorities and values. I've learned that the best kind of success is the kind that lifts other people up instead of just making you rich, he said. Isabella wrote carefully, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Second question, what makes you happy? Marcus looked around his office, which was no longer just a monument to his professional achievements. Isabella's artwork hung on one wall, and Maria's family photo sat on his desk beside his computer. The space felt lived in now, less like a museum and more like a place where people actually spent time together. Having people to share my life with, he said. Having people who care about me, and people I can care about in return. Isabella nodded as she wrote down his answer. Last question. If you could give advice to other important people, what would you tell them? Marcus considered the question carefully. What would he tell his former self, the man who had been so focused on accumulating wealth that he had forgotten why money mattered in the first place? I would tell them that no amount of money is worth being lonely, he said finally. And I would tell them to listen to children, because kids understand things about life that adults sometimes forget. Isabella finished writing and looked up with a satisfied smile. I think this will be a good report. I hope so, Marcus said. But, Isabella, can I ask you a question too? Sure. Do you remember that first day when you asked me if I had a family too? Isabella nodded. You looked really sad when I asked that. I was sad, Marcus admitted. But I didn't realize it until you pointed it out. Why did you ask that question? Isabella thought for a moment. Because my mom always says that everyone needs someone to love them, and someone to love. She says that's what makes people human. When I saw you working all alone in this big office, I thought you might have forgotten that. Marcus felt the truth of her words settle into his heart. He had forgotten what made him human, forgotten that connection and love were more valuable than any amount of wealth or professional success. Thank you for reminding me, he said softly. Isabella smiled and returned to her homework, and Marcus turned back to his computer. But instead of diving into profit reports or market analyses, he opened a new document and began drafting a letter to his parents, whom he hadn't spoken to in months. Outside his window, the city continued its busy rhythm. But Marcus no longer felt separate from it. Thanks to a 9-year-old girl's simple question, he had found his way back to the most important truth of all, that success without love was just expensive loneliness, and that the richest life was one filled with people who mattered. As Isabella worked on her homework and Maria's laughter echoed from somewhere down the hall, where she was training a new facilities team, Marcus Chin smiled and began planning a family dinner for the 3 people who had taught him what it really meant to be successful. Okay, but I should tell you that I don't know much about business. Maybe that's exactly what I need, Marcus said, realizing that her outsider's perspective might be more valuable than any expert advice he could buy. As he began to explain his dilemma about the merger and its impact on employees, Marcus found himself seeing his business empire through the eyes of a 9-year-old girl who understood something about success that he was only beginning to learn. It was the first time in years that anyone had suggested his business dealings take a back seat to anything else. And somehow, looking at Isabella's patient, understanding expression, Marcus found himself agreeing. You're right, he said, setting his phone aside. Isabella, would you like to see the view from my office while we figure out how to find your mom? As they walked toward his corner office, Marcus realized that his perfectly ordered world was about to be turned upside down by the honest questions of a 9-year-old girl who saw things more clearly than he had in years.